This is Our View, the television voice of Washington's working families, brought to you by the proud members of the Washington Federation of State Employees. The legislature does not provide enough funds to keep our state's parks open, and it's up to the Federation members to keep reminding them that parks are a very important feature of our state.
Keeping our parks alive for the next 100 years is my goal today. We want to celebrate this because it truly is a monumental event in Washington State Parks history. But we also need to lobby really hard to make sure that the legislature and the public are informed on what our issues are so that we can keep funding so we have Washington State Parks for 100 more years.
We are coming down here now to the legislature to virtually beg them to fund us. Our funding has gone away virtually. We're going to be supposedly self-funded by the Discover Pass, which is not working out properly. We're at less than 50% for the funding for Discover Pass. So we're hoping at least the legislature will match the Discover Pass funds with general fund monies to keep us alive so that our buildings can be maintained and our properties can be kept up.
If we don't get the funding that we need and parks are forced to go away, close doors, mothball for a few years, it impacts the public tremendously. With 116 parks across the state, there's always some place for someone to go and enjoy the day. If those doors are locked in the park that's down the road from where you live, where you hold your family picnics, your reunions, your church outings, where will you take the Boy Scouts to do anything? If they are closed across the state from you, when you decide that you've got a long weekend and you want to get away from home, that park won't be there for you to throw your tent out, go for a hike along the lake, enjoy the nature. And once those parks have their gates closed, the work to bring them back again is twice as hard as it was now.
1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to yours. Happy birthday, dear Parks. Happy birthday to you. And 100 more.
Many of the developmentally disabled adult residents of our state are cared for by private, for-profit institutions. With that come problems where we suspect the need for profit might outweigh the concern for care.
Speaker has one little function. Has everyone ever voted?
Turnover in this industry ranges between 40 to 60%. That's a huge problem because, as you know, all of that institutional knowledge of you've been working with a client, that consistency, that stability is lost when that staff leaves. And when you bring in another warm body that does not know the client, that doesn't know the background, the tendencies, it is a recipe for disaster in terms of safety and health. And we've seen through the reports that we have that that's exactly what's happened. So turnover is a big issue here. And the other thing is when we talk about health and safety being a top priority, one of the things that kind of came out when we talked to frontline employees is fear of retaliation for speaking up. So what does that mean when you don't have a voice and you can be let go like that? We have some quotes here just very briefly from some complaints that were sent into the complaint resolution unit at DSHS. Employees saying, after an employee shared a lengthy list of concerns, they then said, quote, "Please keep me anonymous because since I started complaining, it seems that KTSS management wants me out of here," end quote. Another one says, quote, "There are also about 9 or 10 other staff who would like to know who to call, but let me spearhead the concerns as I will be leaving. Everyone is scared about losing their jobs, but they're also scared for the client." And lastly, quote, "I want to remain anonymous because the company is quite vindictive," end quote. So I think what's really scary is you have a situation of the fox guarding the hen house, because in some ways the provider has a huge role and responsibility of reporting these, but there's also an internal conflict that you're reporting on yourself.
I wanted to share with you an example that is going to try to illustrate how it is having an inadequate system really leaves clients with the burden of tolerating abuse and neglect. So in this example, you can see there was a supported living client with epilepsy and a developmental disability. When her provider failed to refill her seizure medications, she had a severe seizure that ultimately claimed her life. Over the course of the next year, DSHS repeatedly cited this provider for continued medication errors and safety hazards that were also life-threatening. Eventually, DSHS did what it could do. It decided that it was going to revoke the provider's certification, basically its stamp of approval that lets it get funded with Medicaid. But there was a question about what was going to happen to the provider's 31 other clients who were medically fragile and had developmental disabilities. And we understood from talking with the department that they had no alternative supported living provider ready to go that could support these folks in their home. So we don't know all the reasons or if that was the only reason, but what we do know is that DSHS ended up settling with the provider and allowed it to continue operating under a shortened certification. Now, we were wondering, was this going to serve as a wake-up call to the provider? You know, we almost got put out of business. But what we found from DSHS's complaint logs is that 17 days after this provider was recertified, a new complaint was reported. DSHS investigated and did what it could do. It cited the provider and issued another statement of deficiency. So in this example, we see a system that has too little to adequately address ongoing neglect. And as a result, 31 clients had to tolerate it for at least a year, maybe longer.
Speaking of profits ahead of care, workers at Olympia's Providence Hospital have taken their dispute to the street. The fight is over, of all things, the quality of their health care coverage.
Those of us who, in fact, are receiving this change as of January 1st, they've implemented high deductibles, they've implemented catastrophic high out-of-pocket costs that have affected our families, affected those who, family members, in fact, families have been dropped from their health care, from their members' health care. Families, because they cannot afford the health care costs. There are people who are going to hold off going to getting medical care because of the high deductible, because of the out-of-pocket costs that have gone up. All right, 2 examples. The one young lady whose husband has cystic fibrosis, where all of his medications were covered last year. As of January the 1st, medications that were covered are costing, between that and another medication, $400 a month. $400 a month. Another gentleman who has Parkinson's, he's already choosing between getting his medications and paying for food. What in the world are they thinking about? How can they tell me that they've made arrangements and they're providing benefits to cover that? What in the world are they thinking of? They say, come talk to us. They're not listening.
This is crazy. It shifts all the risks, all the costs onto workers and their families, right? It's absolutely contradictory to the spirit of the Affordable Care Act. If they actually did this in the whole community, this place would go bankrupt.
Even Washington's future, the students in our universities have to make a stand in Olympia to make it possible to continue their education. And it's students who come to the legislature to tell their story.
Well, I think the major issue for students is cost. It's risen astronomically over the last several years. On our bus today, we brought 60 students, and they are paying almost $1 million in debt as of this year. That's frightening, staggering numbers for students, especially in times when people don't have the ability to pay for them. So I think tuition and debt are the main concerns for students, of course. Realistically, the people in this building can help us by funding higher ed to the levels in which they did previously, to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the level at which higher education was funded was much higher than it is today. The equation has switched, and that has been dramatic for the middle-class families of Washington State. So I would just like to see them budget higher ed into one of their priorities. It's a frightening proposition because students are having trouble getting jobs after they graduate, and if they can't get a job, they can't pay off their debt. And this astronomical debt makes it challenging for a young person to take the job they need to take when they graduate, the thing they're passionate about. When we have more students paying higher debt but not getting a higher quality product, we make a debt bubble. And that is a nerve-wracking reality that students are facing today.
In this month's labor history lesson, Ross Reeder takes us to Colorado.
When I get the opportunity to take a long road trip, I make sure that I visit as many as possible of the labor history sites on our path. I still remember fondly the stop at Ludlow, Colorado, just off the interstate about 10 miles north of Trinidad. Before Ludlow, we visited the Walsenburg, Colorado Old Courthouse. That's where we got to see the now spick and span little room in the basement where Mother Jones was held incognito for several weeks while she was trying to help the miners in Ludlow. And then we also visited Trinidad, where the unions and company had headquarters, held parades, rallies, and near riots, etc. In Ludlow, you can view the United Mine Workers Monument and a pit dug under a former tent site. Women and children died of suffocation in that pit when state militia attacked striking workers and their families in the tent community at Ludlow. The conflict between members of the United Mine Workers and the Rockefeller-owned Colorado Fuel and Iron Company began in 1913 over union recognition, as well as the appalling conditions. More than 9,000 miners in the fall of 1913 quit the company property and set up tents on adjacent land. They were protesting against being forced to live in a company town, being paid with company scrip, and working more than 8 hours a day, which happened to be the Colorado law. In the winter of 1914, state militia was called in to dislodge the workers from their tent town. One night, after a series of unsuccessful tries, the troopers riddled the tents with bullets. The troops poured oil on the tents and set them on fire. 11 children and 2 women who had taken refuge in a hole like the one you can view today at Ludlow were burned to death or suffocated. By the time the workers were defeated, 33 men, women, and children had been shot or burned to death. The mine operators won the strike, reported the United Mine Workers Journal, but old John D. lost some of his public affection and had to begin the practice of giving away dimes to placate opinion.
This has been Our View, brought to you by the members of the Washington Federation of State Employees. We remind you, when you accept a paycheck for your hard work, you don't give up your rights. Thank you for watching.